For me, a great TV show is not solely judged by its plot, but by the creative buzz that follows it among its viewers. I find great pleasure in witnessing the artistic outpouring inspired by it. The thought that something done by talented artists can start a chain of creativity is somehow thrilling, and a show where every new season is surrounded by this kind of buzz is Bridgerton. Not only do I see beautiful works of art capturing the essence of the show, but also a fascination with the era and its clothes that inspired it. Seeing people come together and enjoy it is truly inspiring for me. And so, today we attempt to craft a gown fitting the world of Bridgerton, drawing inspiration from the Regency era, billowing fabrics as well as the stormy sea. For today's dress I wanted to give myself a little challenge. My fabric stash is filling up quite fast and I love the feeling of using only supplies I have on hand already, so I thought it would be nice to create a design based on the fabrics I already got. The first step today is to get out all the fabrics and to see which one are calling to us. I sorted the fabrics by color and came up with 3 possible colorways. A pink colorway, then all the white and gold hues, and lastly a grey-blue colorway. I directly leaned towards the last fabrics because I already drew a design with a similar colorway and never came around to make it, so maybe now I can change it up a bit and make something similar. I added a white tulle to the fabrics I want to use, making sure it fits the rest of the fabrics, and removed a few fabrics that were too heavy, like the velvet for example. These are now all the fabrics we'll be using for this project. Some are only small scraps, some are enough for other projects as well, so let's see how we can use them. Now that we got our fabrics, we can sketch out the design. Since the Regency period is not really my favorite one, I don't know a lot about it, but since Bridgerton is also more or less loosely inspired by it, we should be fine. So I started to sketch out a basic dress to get a base silhouette I thought would fit. It incorporates the high waistline and the low neckline as well as puffy sleeves. The design I drew before was meant to represent a stormy ocean, and I wanted this design to have the same vibes. I knew I wanted to incorporate the sleeves of the original sketch with the opening in the front, so I drew them in as well. Then I wanted to add layers of tulle in different lengths to represent waves overlapping each other. Coloring the design was pretty easy with the fabrics already selected. The base dress will be made from a dark grey. The fabric is a bit more warm toned, but this reminds me of the deep sea that sometimes looks even brown when it's a stormy day. Over it I'll layer blue and whites to give it more depth, and around the sleeves I want to add pearls hanging down looking like splashing water. If I have the time I also want to make tulle gloves, picking up the Bridgerton inspiration again. Usually when I take inspiration from old eras for my designs, I don't just think about silhouettes and fabrics, but also about techniques and stitches that have perhaps been used by dressmakers for hundreds of years. I think it's great to expand your knowledge and keep learning new skills so that when working on a project they can be used in a new way. Which is why I'm beyond happy that the sponsor of today's video is Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with lots of classes to grow your skills, whether it's for your hobby or for your profession. It offers thousands of classes spanning mainly creativity, but also marketing, lifestyle and productivity, for example. If you are just like me, always interested in learning more about sewing techniques, there is a fun class by the talented Bernadette Benner where she not only teaches hand stitches, but also gives quick, interesting insights on the history of them. Another class I'm currently taking is the Shape Building Masterclass, working with the shapes in Adobe Illustrator. I learned the Illustrator basics back in school, but now that I want to digitalize my patterns, I'm in desperate need of a refresher. With a class next to the program, I can now start again at the basics and take the time I need to figure everything out again. I actually discovered a fitting learning path, which is a collection of classes that deal with a specific topic and can thus provide an even more detailed view on the things you are interested in. The first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare, so get started today. And thank you again Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Now that I knew how I wanted the dress to look, I sorted the fabrics in the fitting parts for the base dress, sleeves and skirt, and then started preparing the fabric for the base dress. I had a few bigger scraps I could use for the bodice pattern I traced from a pattern with a similar neckline and made shorter. After I ironed interfacing onto the fabric for the bodice, I started to trace the bodice pieces onto it. I traced the sleeves as well, and then the front 2 times and the back panels 4 times to have a simple lining as well. Then I added a 1 cm seam allowance all around the pattern pieces and cut them out. Then I prepared the base skirt using a simple pattern with the circumference from the bottom of the bodice pattern. I chose a half circle to have enough room at the hem, but not too much volume in the skirt. After the skirt was cut, I pinned it onto the mannequin so that it could hang a bit. Then I continued to work on the bodice pieces. I wanted to layer some tulle over the grey base, so the first thing to do was to determine how many layers I wanted to use. I still wanted the top to be more grey than blue, so I decided on 2 layers. At the bottom of the bodice I wanted to layer other fabrics to represent the rough sea there as well. So I cut a few pieces of fabric scraps in smaller parts and layered them on the pattern pieces. As the base I used 2 different tulle colors I cut in curves, and over that I layered some silk chiffon. I wanted it to swirl a little bit and not to lay flat, so I draped it like I wanted it to look and then gently pressed it with my iron so that it stayed like that. Then I laid the 2 tulle layers on top of it. To secure all of the 6 layers, I basted them together. This is done by loosely pulling the thread in an almost spiral-like motion throughout all the layers. Basting is one of my favorite sewing techniques. I love the calmness of this step, and even though I could have probably pinned everything together, this makes the pattern pieces easier to handle and a lot flatter. When everything is properly secured, I could cut the piece a bit smaller and put it aside. Then I continued with the 2 back panels. Here I only added the 2 blue tulle layers, but basted them on as well. The same was done with the sleeve panels. Now that I've prepared all the pieces, I have to decide what to do next. I chose to finish the sleeves completely. Since the sleeves will be open at the front and show another small sleeve underneath, we have to line the outer sleeve. For this I used some rests from a bluish grey to peony silk I still had. I chose this fabric because it's a bit stiffer than the grey fabric and can provide some shape for the big sleeve. So I traced both sleeve parts onto the silk as well. Drew on the 1 cm seam allowance and cut it out. To reinforce the top, I also cut out the top of the sleeve from a petticoat fabric I had dressed pieces from. Those small strips of reinforcement are then pinned to the right places on the silk pieces and then sewn into place. Then I closed the seam on both silk sleeve and outer sleeve, cut away the excess fabric and ironed the seams open. Both pieces are then laid on top of each other and sewn together on both sides of the opening. I secured everything with sewing the seam allowance to the inside and ironed it flat. Then I secured both pieces together at the top and bottom and removed the basting thread from the top of the sleeve. Then I had to work on the inside sleeve. For this I had to draft a new pattern using the bodice pieces as a guide. I even made a small mock-up from fabric that I previously used as a cover for my ironing board. I only had to make minor changes on the pattern and then started to make it wider. I wanted to incorporate some seams onto the design, so I had to add in the extra room for all of those seams. I made this by drawing a straight line onto the original pattern and my pattern paper, and could move the smaller pattern along the line, making sure to add the extra room while tracing. This pattern is then cut out and traced onto another silk piece I had laying around. It was a small piece I ordered to see if the drape would work for a commission, but after we decided against using it for that, I could use it for this project. After tracing, adding the seam allowance and cutting the 2 sleeves, I prepared my sewing machine for all the seams. For those, I just folded the excess fabric towards the right side and sewed over it in a straight line, making the folds half a centimeter wide. Each fold is ironed flat, and combined they give the sleeves a nice texture. I decided to make the folds only on the part that would be visible through the outer sleeve. And then I could already add the 2 sleeves together. First I sewed the bottom. I pinned the 2 sleeves together, making sure to divide the excess fabric of the bigger sleeve evenly. Then I pulled the gathering thread so that both sleeves had the same circumference and sewed them together. To make sure the smaller sleeve won't poke out at the bottom, I sewed over it again and then removed all the basting thread I left in earlier. Now that everything above the pretty high waistline is prepared, we can work on the skirt. We had already cut out the basic skirt layers before, so now we had to repeat the same process with the 2 tulle layers to match the bodice. The tulle was cut the same way as the grey skirt, 2 half circles cut out with a negative pattern, measuring the length with the measuring tape as we go. Then all 3 layers needed to be closed in the back. I did this first with a tulle and then with a grey layer that also needed to be hemmed. To hem a circle, I usually fold the bottom as narrow up as possible and sew over it. Then this has to be pressed carefully. After, it will be turned up and sewn again. For me, this is the easiest and quickest way that also makes a neat end result possible. After trimming and ironing the center back seams, I added all 3 skirt layers together. Then I used the wide tulle to cut all the different wave layers. I pinned them onto the skirt to get a look at the placement and made some small changes to the shape. To make sure I don't confuse them, I marked their placement on the skirt and could then work on the bottom of each layer. For that, I pressed the bottom as random as possible, making sure it waves smoothly. Then I secured the pressed fabric with pins. I made sure to make the waves bigger on the bottom layers and smaller towards the top, and then secured everything by sewing over it, following the waves the fabric makes. Then I pinned each layer onto its original place on the skirt to get the first look to see if it will work in the end. I was quite happy with it and could then sew all the layers together to get one complete skirt. Then I closed the seams on the bodice and had all the parts of the dress, the full skirt with its 9 layers, the 2 sleeves with their 6 layers, and the bodice with its 6 layers, ready to assemble it. I started by adding the sleeves to the bodice. Just like the basting, this is one of my favorite steps. I don't know why, I even heard from a lot of people that they don't like sewing in sleeves at all, but I really enjoy it. If you like, let me know in the comments which part about sewing you like the most, or maybe the least. Prefer to pin both sleeves in so I can check if they look similar before sewing them in. After both sleeves are added, I decided to sew in the lining layer. I did this before adding the skirt because turning the dress after sewing the neckline is actually one of my least favorite parts, because everything looks so messy. So I like to do it when the piece is as small as possible. This makes it a lot easier to move it around the ironing board while pressing the neckline. Then I removed the basting threads on the straps and neckline, and as a last step sewed on the skirt onto the bodice. And now that we have the base dress ready, it's time to decorate it a bit. First I worked on the sleeves. I added the rest of the silk chiffon into the sleeves and sewed the opening a bit wider so that you can really look inside. Then I prepared some pearl strings by using fishing line in various lengths. I threaded pearls on it in different sizes with some space in between to make it look like water drops. Then I added those threads to the dress at the waistline and the sleeves. As the last step, I wanted to make some fitting gloves for the dress. I already had a pattern, so I could directly trace it onto the tulle. Then I had to change the thread in the sewing machine one last time, sew all around the sleeve and trim away the excess fabric. And here is the finished dress. I think it captures the Bridgerton vibe pretty well. It definitely fits in with a more fantasy-like approach on the era. There are a few things I would have changed looking back, like the length of the sleeves, for example. I think shorter sleeves would enhance the Regency look even more, and the ones I made are a bit out of proportion. With the Stormy ocean theme, on the other hand, I'm really happy. I love the layers of the skirt and I really think they look like waves. My favorite details are probably the pearls, because I think they make the dress look more enchanting. The process of making the dress made a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed making something for a theme so many people get inspired by. I love to look at drawings or costumes people create inspired by the series, and I hope some of them maybe enjoy this dress or video too. If you liked today's video, feel free to like it and subscribe to my channel. Thanks again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video, and until next time.